I want to start with the big topic that everyone around the world has been talking about, and that is tariffs. And the fact that even a small country like Lebanon was not immune to the Trump administration's decision to impose 10% tariffs. How is Lebanon poised to deal with just another potential shock to the system?
Absolutely. Good morning, Joumanna. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and indeed my very first international appearance since I took over. Listen, I mean, this is an amazing reminder to the Lebanese and to most small countries that we live in a very large world that really matters. We tend to spend so much of our time focused on our own internal problems. But then there are two impacts. One, our exports to the U.S. themselves are not being taxed. Incidentally, not taxed as much as other countries, which is a good thing, but they're still taxed nonetheless, and that's going to have a comparative issue. But I think the more important one is we're watching very carefully what's happening to the global economy. We are extremely integrated. A global recession, if it were to happen, will be impactful for us. Lower oil prices, fairly large impact for us, given our presence of our international diaspora that lives in the Gulf. These things do matter. These things matter, and we're watching them quite carefully.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to the, I would say, priorities of the new Lebanese government and yourself, part of the government, of course. Of note is you've restarted discussions now with the IMF. We know that the spring meetings are taking place in the IMF in a couple of weeks' time. Can you give us more color on exactly what sort of financial package, what sort of assistance Lebanon is seeking this time around, and how it differs from the staff-level agreement from 2022?
Absolutely. Listen, I mean, at the end of the day, and I say this with complete genuineness, this is not meant to be an IMF program for the sake of having an IMF program. This is meant to develop, articulate an economic plan that matters for the country itself. I'll come back to the details in a second. But what is the objective? I mean, I always start from the very end. And the objective is growth, is bringing back this economy back to the prosperity that it deserves. The idea that Lebanon today has a per capita income of $4,000 is unacceptable. This country should be significantly larger, significantly more productive. And everything we're doing is not to make the IMF happy, much as we would like to, of course, but also to put the economy back on a path that brings back to the Lebanese what they need. Right? What does that mean? These are the files that we're going to be talking about. There's going to be the file of medium-term fiscal sustainability. The government has to grow. The government has to come back to health, and that does have implications in terms of debt. It's a country that has significant sectoral dislocations. Electricity, as you know, it's a shame that the Lebanese get only 6 hours of electricity. This is absolutely impactful for producers. We need to make electricity more present and cheaper. There is the issue of, and that's probably the more important one that we'll be talking about, which is the financial sector. Lebanon has had a crisis in 2019. People have lost massive amount of their deposits, and that requires some urgent effort. And this is part of the priority that we're working with them and with the government with IMF, trying to implement articulated plan there.
Yeah, so let's talk more about that, because a banking bill was passed over the course of the weekend by the cabinet. First of all, is it your expectation that that cabinet bill is going to be approved by Parliament? And just as a follow-up question to that, the government has talked about the fact that you don't want to see losses imposed on the small depositors. How technically feasible is that? Where are the distribution of losses going to come from?
Absolutely. So let me sort of step back, if you don't mind, and articulate a little bit of a work plan or a vision of how we're thinking about this. We're thinking about it sequentially. The decision is that you go step by step. And there are 3 steps that we're thinking about. And we've been in power for only 2.5 months, and we've already done 2 out of the 3 steps. The first of which is we need to categorically remove bank secrecy. Bank secrecy is a constraint for information gathering. Bank secrecy is needed in order to removing bank secrecy. So important to figure out the size of the problem and the issues that are associated with it, right? This is something that we've approved in the cabinet, is with the parliament. We're working very closely with the parliament, and we have some confidence that over the next few weeks, they will actually pass it. The second step, which is the one we approved this last week, that's an important, extremely important step, is to set up a structural legal framework that allows the government and the central bank to deal with financial crisis, whether it's this one, the major one we're working through, but more importantly, the future one. Lebanon was one of the few countries that never had that framework. This is a very simple and, dare I say, boring. It's a step-by-step approach, a menu approach of when you get into a crisis, who deals with it, how do you form it, how do you think of the auditing, who do you decide, who makes decisions, what are the appeal process? Fairly boring, but extremely important. The third step is the one that you asked about. We're going to take our time, right? This is the one when you come up with a plan, a financial, sort of a final plan. Depositor protection is an extremely important part of the objectives that we have in place, right? That may require instruments, that may require delays or some time passage in order to pay some of these. But the idea is that nobody would lose their deposits. But it may take time, it may take some effort with different structures.
But Minister, the losses in the system are estimated to be as high as $70 billion. That's multiples of Lebanon's GDP. Can you just clarify if you're expecting both the bank shareholder participation alongside the state to deal with the distribution of these losses? Is it going to be both private sector and state?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the important thing here is to keep in mind is that this is still a plan that is being discussed and prepared. And for the sake of clarity, this is a joint effort. It's being run by the Minister of Finance. We have a new central bank head, and the effort is being. So part of this is being discussed. So it's too early to get into too much detail. But there are certain principles, right? One principle is that this is not going to be enforced. This is something that has to come after consultation. The second is I do feel it's a distraction to spend too much time thinking about one winner, one loser. This is a fairly large effort that requires some form of collaboration. And the collaborations have to be among the stakeholders, the banks, the central bank, but also the government itself. There's a limit to how much we can impose on each of them. The banks need to survive. The banks need to grow. The central bank needs to conduct monetary policy, and the government has to be contained within some form of debt sustainability. Spending too much time on being precise at this point can end up throwing one into distractions. The bottom line here is within the objective of figuring out a solution to the debt that does not, to the depositors that does not, a fair solution to depositors while maintaining the health of the banking sector and creating some form of a collective solution is what the principles would be.
Minister, all of this is very important in terms of figuring out the Lebanon economy direction. But of course, many people around the world are concerned about the security situation and the potential for this ceasefire to actually keep holding. What is the government's assessment on the longevity of the ceasefire with Israel right now? Because there have been several violations over the course of the last couple of weeks. And how important is it to have political security for your economic plans to be enacted?
I'm going to be sort of more broad about this question because this is honestly quintessentially a political question. But what is very clear, and to contextualize it, is that without economic security, without sovereignty, without the monopoly of the state over all of its land and of its arms, it's very difficult to see economic growth progressing. This is one constraint. There are multiple other constraints that I mentioned, right? That we need to work on sectoral development. We need to work on infrastructure. We need to improve the state as an enabler of growth, as we were talking about. We need to improve the financial sector and bring it back into health. We need to bring back investors. One of the things that we're really focused on is having an investor conference in September that showcases Lebanon and tells the world Lebanon is back in play, Lebanon is back in business, the private sector has to come back. So there's multiple issues. Security, politics is certainly one of them. I don't want to underestimate it, but there are many other files that we need to work on to bring back the country to the prosperity it deserves.